The Pacific air still smelled of salt and oil that morning. Heavy, like metal soaked in memory. The base at Coronado was waking up slowly, boots hitting asphalt, engines roaring, the low hum of a flag being raised. No one noticed the old man walking past the checkpoint. He wasn't supposed to be there. Arthur Grayson walked as if he still belonged, shoulders straight, gaze fixed on the horizon. His uniform wasn't new, but it wasn't shabby either. It carried history, creases like scars, metals dulled with years of sunlight and sand. "Sir, this area is restricted," said a young Marine at the gate. Arthur smiled. "It always was, son." He handed over his ID, a card so old that the chip had faded to gray. The guard scanned it, hesitated, then stiffened. Captain Grayson." "Retired," Arthur said quietly. "But that's still me." The Marine saluted without understanding why, just instinct. Arthur nodded and kept walking. Behind him, the flag reached the top of the mast, and for a moment, he stopped. The wind pulled at it like time itself, tugging at the past. Inside the mess hall, laughter echoed, loud, careless. A group of recruits were joking around, tossing trays, talking about games and training. They didn't see the old man until he was right beside them, waiting for coffee. One of them, a tall kid with a clean shave and arrogance sharper than his uniform, whispered, "Who let Grandpa in? Lost on the way to the museum?" The others snickered. Arthur poured his coffee, didn't answer. He took a sip. Black, bitter, perfect. He looked at the boy and said softly, "You ever fly over the Pacific at dawn, son?" The boy blinked. No, sir," Arthur nodded. "Then don't talk about things you've never seen." The hall went silent. Someone at the back muttered, "Who the hell is that?" Another answered, "Some relic. Probably cleaning crew." Arthur finished his coffee, left the cup on the counter, and walked out. The same calm steps, the same unbroken line of purpose. The laughter didn't return for a long time. In the administration office, a younger officer noticed the signature in the logbook. "Grayson, Arthur J." "Wait, wasn't that the name from Operation Red Fjord?" The clerk looked up. "Yeah, the one who disappeared after the debrief. The files were sealed." The officer frowned. "What the hell's he doing here now?" No one had an answer. Arthur made his way to the old hangar, Hangar 12, a place long forgotten, half turned into storage. Dust hung in the air like fog. In the far corner, under a tarp, something metallic shimmered. He pulled the cover back. A helicopter engine, old, marked with his call sign. Silver sky. He placed his hand on the cold metal and whispered, "Still breathing, old friend." The engine gave no reply. But somewhere deep inside, a faint click echoed, like a memory waking up. He turned and looked at the shadows stretching across the floor. He knew what he came for. Not nostalgia, not recognition. Something had gone wrong at this base. Something buried, and if no one else remembered, he would make them remember. The next morning, Arthur returned before sunrise. The base was quiet, the kind of silence that only exists between orders. He wore his old flight jacket now, the one with a torn patch and the faded emblem of his squadron. 71st Airborne Recon, Pacific Command. He moved through the hallways like a shadow, past new walls built over old foundations. The air smelled different, synthetic, sterile, nothing like the gasoline and salt he remembered. He stopped outside the control center and stared at the glowing security lock. "Still the same model," he muttered. "You just got a new badge." From his pocket, he took a worn brass key, a relic from another time. The lock beeped red, then green. Guess some ghosts still have clearance. Inside, monitors flickered with classified logs and drone feeds. Young analysts stared at screens showing coordinates, movements, color-coded threats. None of them noticed the old man walking in until he spoke. "Why are you scanning Red Fjord?" One of the officers jumped. "Who are you?" Arthur stepped closer. "The last man who landed there." They didn't understand. They couldn't. Red Fjord wasn't on any public map. It was a mission that never officially happened. An extraction gone wrong, decades ago. 3 pilots in. 1 returned. And that one, Arthur Grayson, carried a silence so heavy it never left him. When the base commander, Colonel Reeves, arrived, he looked half curious, half annoyed. "Captain Grayson," Reeves began, "what are you doing here?" "Looking for what you lost," Arthur answered. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "Integrity," Arthur said simply. The room froze. Reeves's jaw tightened. "This base doesn't answer to ghosts, Captain." Arthur smiled faintly. "Then you'd better start listening to them, Colonel." He handed Reeves a small flash drive, scratched, worn, labeled Gray Fjord, 1983. Reeves frowned. "Where did you get this?" "Arthur." "From a locker you thought was sealed." The colonel motioned to a young tech to plug it in. The screen blinked to life. Old footage, black and white, showing a rescue operation under fire, helicopters circling smoke, and then radio chatter. A voice. "Silver Sky to command. Evac zone compromised. Repeat, compromised." Reeves turned pale. "That's classified." Arthur. "Classified isn't the same as forgotten." Outside, a new storm gathered over the coastline. The wind carried the sound of the sea, the same rhythm as the rotor blades he once trusted with his life. Arthur stepped outside, feeling the pressure in his chest. He wasn't here to fight. Not anymore. He was here to remind. He sat by the tarmac, eyes closed, as the memory returned. The faces, the smoke, the final command that never reached him in time. And in that silence, a new sound began. Footsteps. Mark Donovan, a younger pilot with sharp eyes, approached. "Sir, I looked up your record. You're a legend, sort of," Arthur chuckled. "Sort of?" "Well," Mark hesitated. "Half the files are redacted and the rest sound impossible." Arthur. "That's how you know it's true." The young pilot sat beside him. "Why come back now?" Arthur's voice softened. "Because the world's getting loud again, and sometimes silence needs a voice." Back inside, Colonel Reeves watched the footage again, his hands trembling slightly. The faces on the screen, young men, his father among them, and Arthur's voice over the radio. "We don't leave our own behind." He looked up at his officers. "Delete everything. I don't want this story leaving the base." But the tech whispered, "Sir, it's already uploading." Somewhere, deep in the base servers, Silver Sky's voice had been heard again. Not as an order, but as a warning. That night, Arthur returned to Hangar 12. He touched the cold metal of the engine once more. "It's happening again, old friend," he whispered. "They've forgotten what loyalty means." The engine clicked, once, as if agreeing. The next day, the base buzzed like a disturbed beehive. The footage from the flash drive had spread, not through media, but through whispers. Every soldier, every pilot, every cadet had heard about the old man who brought back ghosts. Some called him a hero. Others called him a threat. Arthur didn't care which one was closer to the truth. He walked across the runway as a Blackhawk lifted off, the roar of its blades shaking the ground. The young recruits turned to watch him. Not mocking this time, but curious. There was something about the way he carried himself, a stillness that didn't belong to this era of digital orders and drone warfare. "Captain Grayson," he turned. It was Mark Donovan again, running after him. "They're saying you hacked the main server," Arthur smirked. I can barely use a touchscreen, Mark grinned. Then they're scared. Good, Arthur said. Fear wakes people up. Colonel Reeves wasn't amused. When Arthur was escorted into the briefing room, Reeves was waiting with 2 MPs and a cold glare. You've caused quite the stir, Captain. Unauthorized access, data breach, public disturbance, Arthur interrupted. Truth isn't unauthorized, Colonel. You just buried it too deep. Reeves slammed a folder onto the table. You were declared mentally unfit for service after Redfjord. You shouldn't even be here. Arthur looked up slowly. I shouldn't be alive either, yet here we are. Reeves exhaled through his nose, then pointed at the old man's jacket. That insignia, the 71st, was dissolved after the war. Arthur nodded. Because they didn't want anyone asking what happened to them. Reeves leaned in. And what did happen? Arthur's eyes hardened. You already know. You just don't want to say it out loud. The room fell silent. Reeves' expression shifted, guilt flickering through his mask of authority. Then he straightened. Escort him off the base. As the MPs stepped forward, Mark suddenly entered the room, holding a tablet. Sir, you should see this. On the screen, footage from that morning. The base servers automatically syncing to the Defense Archives. The Redfjord data had gone live. Every soldier in the country could now see the operations details, and Arthur's name among the survivors. Reeves whispered, What have you done? Arthur's voice was calm. I told the truth. That's all I ever did. That night, Arthur sat near the coastline, watching the moon trace silver lines across the Pacific. The sound of the tide was the same as it had been 40 years ago, calm above chaos. Mark joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You're trending on every military channel, he said. Some think you're a hero. Some think you're a liar. Arthur smiled faintly. The truth usually lands between the two. Mark hesitated, then asked, Did you lose someone back then? Arthur didn't answer at first. He just watched the horizon, where the sea met the night. 3 men, brothers. We went in together, only I came back. Mark swallowed hard. You tried to save them? Arthur turned his gaze to the young pilot. I did, but command gave the order to pull out. They didn't even try. That's what I've lived with ever since. The next morning, he woke to find a note slipped under his door. No name, just 3 words. Hangar 12, midnight. He arrived under cover of darkness. Inside, the lights were already on. Colonel Reeves stood there, alone. You were right, Reeves said quietly. I've found the rest of the files. They never told you the truth. Arthur frowned. Go on. The evac signal. It wasn't lost in transmission. It was overridden. Someone wanted the mission to fail. Arthur's jaw clenched. Who? Reeves looked him straight in the eye. My father. Silence hit harder than any explosion. Arthur stepped back, staring at the colonel, suddenly seeing not authority, but the echo of a boy left behind by the same war. Reeves continued, voice trembling. He signed the order. He thought sacrificing your team would end the conflict faster. He lived with that guilt until he died. Arthur's voice was a whisper. He wasn't the only one. The 2 men stood there, surrounded by shadows and the smell of old oil and rust. Reeves took a breath. You deserve an apology, Captain, and a salute. Arthur shook his head. I don't need either. I just want them remembered. He turned toward the engine, marked Silver Sky, the last link to his past. Fire her up, he said quietly. Reeves blinked. It hasn't flown in decades, Arthur smiled. Neither have I. The hangar lights dimmed as the ignition clicked once, then twice, and the machine, like a memory refusing to die, roared back to life. The sound of the engine filled the hangar. Raw, ancient, alive. Dust swirled through the beams of light, glowing gold in the roar. For a second, Arthur wasn't an old man anymore. He was 28 again. The Pacific sky was burning red. His co-pilot was laughing. The radio screamed for extraction, and Silver Sky still flew. Colonel Reeves stood beside him, speechless. The vibration shook the walls, rattled the old metal frames, but Arthur's hands were steady, calm, precise, trained by instinct. "She still remembers," Arthur said. Reeves swallowed hard. "How the hell did you—" Arthur smiled. "Because I never forgot." He turned the throttle down, and the engine coughed into silence. The sound faded, leaving only the echo of a man's past filling the air. Later, they stood outside the hangar. The sky was fading to violet. The ocean's wind whispering across the base. Reeves looked at him, not as a superior, not as a colonel, but as a man staring at history that somehow refused to die. "What happens now, Captain?" he asked. Arthur looked toward the horizon. "Now, you remember. That's enough." Reeves hesitated. "They'll want to question you, maybe even detain you," Arthur chuckled. "They can't arrest a ghost." He handed the colonel a folded paper, an old photo of 4 young men in front of their chopper. Reeves looked closer. His father stood among them. Arthur whispered, "He made his choices. So did I. Don't repeat them." Then he turned and started walking down the runway, the same steps he had taken 40 years earlier when the war ended, but this time slower, quieter, at peace. 2 days later, an official notice reached the Pentagon's internal network. Subject: unauthorized activity. Decommissioned aircraft report. Incident at Coronado Base. No damage, no casualties. Classified data leak remains under investigation. Addendum: the individual identified as Captain Arthur J. Grayson is presumed deceased since 1984. Case closed. But on the same morning, a helicopter appeared on radar, an unidentified craft hovering 10 miles off the coast. No insignia, no ID, just a single signal ping. Call sign: Silver Sky. It disappeared moments later, vanishing into the fog. Mark Donovan sat in the hangar, staring at the empty spot where the helicopter had been. On the workbench lay Arthur's jacket, neatly folded with one last note beneath it. Mark opened it carefully. "Don't let them teach you fear. Loyalty doesn't need permission." He read it twice, then looked up at the open hangar doors, where the sunlight poured in. A shadow crossed the tarmac. Maybe a cloud, maybe something else. And for just a heartbeat, he could have sworn he heard the faint rhythm of rotor blades. Months later, during a memorial ceremony, Colonel Reeves stood before the assembled soldiers. "Today, we remember Captain Arthur Grayson," he began. "A man who taught us that duty doesn't end with service, and truth doesn't age." He paused, his voice almost breaking. "He reminded us what it means to stand for something when everyone else forgets." As the bugle played, the soldiers raised their hands in salute. The flag rippled against the Pacific wind, fierce, alive, unyielding. And somewhere far beyond the coastline, through the mist and the silence, a faint voice seemed to echo through the airwaves once again. "Silver Sky to command, mission complete." The static faded, and with it, the legend of Arthur Grayson became more than a story. It became a reminder.